We are back, ladies and gentlemen, with Season 4, Episode 7, Bats, the episode in which a series of vampire fruit bats threaten Sweet Apple Acres, and some interesting and fantastic concepts are immediately thrown out the window in order to have time for Vampire Flutterbat. And then they savor the end. So, this episode was nowhere near as good as I remembered it being. I'm just gonna open with that. I don't know how badly we're gonna rate this one, but it's not gonna be super high. And I want to explain why. There's two reasons why I remember liking this episode, and both are actually still valid. But, well, let's move on, shall we? So it's apple bucking season again. And you could interpret this one of several different ways. The first and most obvious way is that it has been a year since the last time they've done apple bucking season, which was back in Season 1. So 1 year across the 4 seasons. You could also say it's been 2 years, 3 years, or 4 years. All of those are valid, since this might just be the second, third, or fourth of the apple bucking season that we've seen on camera. Not that hard to interpret, I just thought I'd mention it. AJ, Applejack, shows off her mega apple. What's funny to me is that's actually a thing. Now, I don't know if real-life apple genetic engineering, I don't know what else to call that, can actually produce an apple that sized. But real-life farmers have, since I was a kid, done things where you cross the branches and you cross-pollinate in order to try and increase the size of the apples, or pumpkins, or watermelons, or whatever. I mean, stay fair, right? You know what I'm talking about. This is not exactly an unused concept. I also want to say it's interesting that when they first notice that the vampire bats are there, the first thing they do is they allow Fluttershy to go and talk to the vampire bats. Because one of Fluttershy's talents is that she can talk to animals. And then the vampire bats can't talk back. Now, they give a relatively well-reasoned answer for why, but it's interesting to me because it kind of helps to... Because it's there for plot. Yeah, go ahead, Loner. Right? I mean, that's why. The reason Fluttershy cannot talk to the vampire bats to see... Vampire fruit bats, excuse me. To see their side of the equation is because then the episode would be over. That would basically completely negate all of the drama of the episode. So naturally, she cannot, in fact... Wow. That is very big. Look at that. That is still substantially smaller than Applejack's, but still, that's impressive. Good lord. Anyways, so, if reasonable discourse was allowed, I think this episode wouldn't have even happened. Although, I want you to pay attention. Sierra Mike just pointed something out. Their response was to spit seeds at her, which is incredibly rude. I also want you to notice that at every time the vampire bats are shown in the episode, in reality, not in the song, not in imagination, they are rude and crude consistently. I want you to keep that in mind. I'm going to bring it up later, okay? So then we have the song. Bats. I still like this song. I like this song so much I put it in the number 3 slot for my favorite songs so far. Then again, I've always been partial to Danny Elfman. I haven't been able to figure out if this is actually a deliberate homage to Danny Elfman, but this is a Halloween-styled episode that came out on Christmas with music done in this style, and it's got the spooky atmosphere. It wouldn't surprise me if this is a deliberate homage to Mr. Elfman. I also love the visual presentation of the song, because both sides of the argument are shown as incorrect, if you're paying attention. Anytime Applejack is singing, the color goes desaturated, and it's all darker, and it's always nighttime, and the vampire bats go from being, kind of bat-looking to being... And then it switches over to Fluttershy, and it's always daytime and singing, very colorful, very bright, and the vampire bats suddenly look like big, fluffy, cuddly Pokemon, And the total contrast between the two was nice, and was good visual presentation for a song I liked, which could have been the basis for an excellent episode. Fluttershy's comments. So if I was sitting here judging this, you know, I'm an Imperial judge, and Fluttershy and Applejack have come to me and said, who's right? I would lean more towards Applejack, because I actually know just a little bit about botany or biology, or however you want to call that. Just a little. You know, I have done work on a farm. I started studying it and then stopped because I got into other fields. And Fluttershy's arguments are basically wrong. One of the points she makes, and she says this consistently, it's one of her biggest points, is that the new apple trees will grow bigger and stronger after this. Species pollination is a very big and common thing for a lot of plants and whatnot. And obviously, you know, they're talking about a fantasy world with fantasy apples and blah blah blah. But yeah, the eating the apple and spitting out the seeds is not going to do that. In fact, the usual way that happens is like we've got orchard A and we've got orchard B here, which are quite a distance from each other. And what usually happens is bats from this orchard will, you know, after eating apple seeds here, will come over here, and then, hey, look, there's seeds. And then the apples from here, the ones will go over here, and they'll do this to seeds and blah, blah, blah. And it's the spreading of the seeds and the spreading of that cross-pollination that tends to, you know, actually improve the health of the animals. Agave, real-life agave actually is pollinated by vampire fruit bats, and that's actually a real-life problem that real-life farmers have with agave, because if a farmer does not allow vampire fruit bats into their fields, there's going to be problems, and you get the ideas. Then she mentions her idea for a sanctuary, which is what they end up doing at the end of the episode. This is a terrible idea, because what you do when you create a sanctuary is you create a place where they can live in safety and comfort with plentiful food, which sounds like a good idea, but what that means is almost universally going to be an increase in population, which means you're going to have the safe zone, which is, for lack of a better way to it, spawning waves of bats that will then go and seek new territory, because that's how life works. Even in Ponyville, even in Equestria, that's how life works, right? So, yeah, also AJ is giving up part of her livelihood for nothing. And yeah, this is now granted, I'm trying to use real life logic, so forgive me. I'm sure the argument is going to come up, well, it's fantasy, and you're right, it's fantasy. But the point is, even if I was to say it's fantasy, Fluttershy has no argument. And the song showed that most clearly of all. We see what the vampire bats actually are. You remember I mentioned the crude and rude thing? They do not have this big, loving family, tender care thing. They do not give a damn about others. They are not interested in compromise. They are acting as parasites, to put it as bluntly as possible. There's no real argument that Fluttershy gives that's valid. Whereas Applejack at least does give a valid argument. This is my livelihood. And that's her argument. You know, even if you ignore all the other things, which again, we'd have to throw out the window. Yeah, if they were an endangered species, that is different. I forget what it's called. There's something in Australia. I was just looking this up because I was looking up stuff related to this episode that has exactly the same thing like that. Yeah, there is an entry in the book. I'll read it. Don't worry. But yeah, I like, you see why I'd side with Applejack in this episode. But that being said, as I mentioned, in real life, this is actually a surprisingly complex topic. Appropriately allowing animals to be in your orchard, and bugs, actually, is a thing that you want, but within limitation, right? And you want the right kind of bugs, you want the right kind of animals, and you want them in the right ways at the right times. That is a complex issue, which is the kind of thing that I like that this show tends to showcase and argue about. And it's the kind of thing I would absolutely adore to see, because even for a kid, who isn't going to appreciate the nuance and subtlety of the situation in the same way that we do. The fact is, a kid could still appreciate both sides are right, which is a very, very important kind of message that children need to learn, I think. Sometimes one person's not going to be in the wrong and one person's not going to be in the right. Sometimes it's just two sides who are disagreeing with each other. And you need to get used to that. And figuring out how to deal with that is a very important life skill that, frankly, a lot of adults could stand to learn. That's not what they do, though. See, you'll notice I'm actually talking up this episode, and I'm kind of with it, right? Yeah! But I checked at about the 10-minute mark, which is just about halfway through the episode, that plotline is dumped and never brought up again until the very end when they show the sanctuary and they say, I learned a lesson today. It's abandoned. That's why this episode is not as good as I remember. I like most of the first half of the episode quite a bit. I like the song, I like the presentation, I like the ideas that could be there. Because remember, this is also a fantastical setting, right? So, I was just mentioning it's not real life. Well, one of the things that exists in this fantastical setting is mind control, brainwashing. Mass Effect 2, anybody? Do you rewrite them, or do you destroy them? And that is a legitimate, fictional, philosophical quandary that you'd have out of this. And that's actually a cool concept. They have access to magic. They have the ability to try and rewrite them or move them, which would cause them damage. What is right there? What do you choose there? That is a fascinating... We've been talking about this for the last 2.5 weeks as we've been playing through Persona 5, where the exact same topic is actually brought up. So you could see why I'm sitting here and I'm thinking, this is a fascinating, engaging, interesting premise, and there's multiple topics that can be brought up that's fantastic, and then it's just dumped. And that's why this episode is descending, in my opinion, because the next thing that happens is Flutterbat for 11 minutes. So, I've talked quite a bit about the first half. I have substantially less to say about the second half. But, as always, I do want to mention some specific points. First of all, Rarity's hazmat suit is fantastic. Can I just say that? Second of all, Rarity is still awesome. This is actually jumping forward a bit. Fluttershy, do come down from there. And do stop being a vampire bat. I actually laughed out loud at that one. That one caught me. But yeah, so Twilight goes for the rewriting the food thing, right? She rewrites their desire to eat apples. Okay. What do they eat instead? Now, in the Parasprites episode, that episode actually acknowledged what the Parasprites ate instead of food. Here, they just completely toss it out the window. They don't even examine what the fruit bats are going to eat other than apples. That's problematic. Then, the change that happens to Fluttershy is actually a very specific type of change. We have so many different kinds of vampires throughout fiction, but what we have here is basically the bestial vampire, which you've probably seen before in several other fictional works. They morph, they're ravenous, and they attack people, and they change without their own free will, and they have no memory of what they've done while they're in their other form. And I'm describing a werewolf, actually, if you're paying any attention here. This is what she is doing is effectively most of the standard rules for lycanthropy. Most vampires don't actually follow this rule. It's a very small subset of vampires that follow this rule. But yeah, she effectively becomes non-sapient, can't understand, can't speak, and again, has no memories. And her form changes and she eats, blah, 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 blah. Now, Flutterbat's cute and all, but then the episode does two things, which I consider to be a little bit criminal. The first thing it does is it pads its runtime with the second half. Keep in mind, this is only 10 minutes. That's not a long period of time to fill. But they do 2 periods of padding. First is leading up to the reveal of the fact that she is Flutterbat, where they all act freaked out and wigged out because, oh my god, it's scary. I will give them credit on this point. It's amusing to me that they're scared of Flutterbat because Flutterbat is completely non-harmful to them. She never attacks them. And she's only interested in the fruit. There's even this great bit where Spike is like, no! And he's running away and he dives down and Flutterbat completely ignores him and goes for the apple next to him. So credit there. But the second part is then the episode has to laboriously explain to the audience exactly what happened, even though the episode has already showcased what happened. Very, very well, I might add. Now, I know what you're saying. Well, kids are stupid. No, they're not. Kids do not need the episode to hit the brakes and pause to explain the premise of the fact that the magic spell has turned her into a vampire bat. I'm pretty sure they picked up on that. In fact, I know that for total certainty because my niece did when she was younger than she is now. So then we get the closest thing this episode has to a message. Hear me out, I got a second point about this. Where she's willing to sacrifice her hard work and her apple in order to save her friend. Cool, I'm kind of with that. Then we have a quick who's on first back and forth thing between Pinkie and Fluttershy. That was actually pretty funny, I'll give you that episode. And then the actual message of the episode shows up and says, you should seek long-term solutions instead of short-term solutions. Now, forgive me for ranting for a second here, but that's stupid. Not the message itself. That is a wonderful message that many people need to learn. Long-term solutions tend to be more valuable than short-term solutions. You know, that was the theme of the Grand Theft Auto 4 run, right? But the problem is that has nothing to do with the episode. The Sanctuary is not actually a long-term solution. And what AJ was seeking was not a short-term solution. So it's like... I don't even have an equivalent. It's like going through an episode and then all of a sudden, here's this other lesson, and this is the lesson of the episode. What? Yeah, as SA2K points out, they actually showed a legitimate famine in the flashback that Granny Smith went through. I actually had a note, and I wrote it down right there. What if these were locusts? Because in the way that they are presented, these are locusts. Not literally, of course, but the way that they interact with the crop in the field. And anyone who knows anything about farming, even passively, can tell you how you deal with locusts. That's also a valid point, Baron. There's also there's a tier of solutions. Sometimes you need a short-term band-aid to get to a long-term solution. That's also a thing. That's a good question, Sierra Mike. I don't know. But you do have to admit that this whole thing... Yeah, I know, right, Osutuka? You do have to admit that this whole thing is just kind of a... It doesn't feel well constructed at all, is kind of my point. They had a wonderful premise. Really, they did. And I was completely down, and I was ready to be engaged, and I had so many thoughts, and I shared them earlier. And then the episode just kind of stops, spends some time with Flutterbat, and then never actually addresses anything. Oh, but I learned something today. That's why I think, despite everything, I think I'm going to give this a below-average rating. Oh yeah, and the episode ends on a wah-wah. A very obvious one. And Fluttershy still has her fangs, which, to my knowledge, will only come up again once ever. Which is a shame, because I like long-term character changes, and even something cosmetic like that would have been nice, but nope. Where the hell's my counters? There they are. I should mention a couple of things, though. So first of all, I am actually going to add a few things to the continuity counter. First, the stare, Rainbow Dash's thing with cider, and Fruit Bat Roundup, Fruit Bat Roundup. So that's 3 additions to the continuity counter. However, I do also have to add to the counter continuity counter, which at this point is coming... I should just rename the idiot ball. See, there's this part where they're trying to help Fluttershy, right? Flutterbat, excuse me. And they're like, oh my god, how could we possibly capture Flutterbat? She just keeps flying around us. Then they trap her for a bit with an image of herself, even though she isn't doing the stare and therefore is not actually anything. And as they trap her, Twilight holds her in place with her telekinesis to change her back, and then gently lets her back down. I could say that again if I didn't get my point clearly there. This is also ignoring the fact that in addition to powerful telekinesis, Twilight has already demonstrated prior to now having effectively a time stop that she could use on a group of ponies in a larger area than this. So, if you really want me to go into the counter continuity of this, during the last Applebuck Harvest episode, back in Season 1, so we've got two connections, it was prior to this, and it was related to the same topic, she helped lift apples off of at least a dozen trees simultaneously and carry them over to the thing. Yeah. Below average. Some good ideas, and I do like the song. I actually legitimately do care for the song. But I think this one qualifies as below average. Sorry. Which is a shame, because I was actually looking forward to this one.